5 things I wish I understood when I started running. These 5 things apply to all of us, regardless of what our goals are, regardless of what our ability level is. Every single one of these elements is applicable to anyone who really does any sport at all, not just running. I think people who maybe aren't fixated on specific lofty goals and targets probably learn these things much faster, but the chances are, whoever you are still going to struggle with at least one of these at some point in your running journey. Patience. The results do not come overnight, but if you put consistent work in over time, they will happen. I have been running in some form or other since I was about 11. I ran track during secondary school and cross country, and compared to the rest of the competitive field at the teenage level in Lincolnshire, I was pretty good. I wasn't the best, but I was definitely well above average when it came to performances compared to the rest of the field I had experience with. Now, I did a lot of other extracurricular stuff, and although I qualified to go to the Midlands cross country several times, it always clashed with the dress rehearsal for the school show, and I was usually the stage manager. Now, our school show was a really big deal, like it was a borderline professional level production, so I needed to be there. I couldn't really prioritize running in that instance because the other thing I put myself forward for was more important, and it was more necessary for me to be there. However, this meant that I just simply never witnessed the level that other people were at in the wider scope of UK athletics. So I only ever really had this sort of understanding that I was pretty good because I could kind of comfortably come in the top 10 in the county for cross country. Now, in university I didn't really run all that much because I was focusing on other sports, which is what it is. It's fine. I don't regret that. I enjoyed the parkour detour. I enjoyed doing Muay Thai. I enjoyed those things, so I don't regret it. And then in my early 20s, I was still doing parkour, but I was running a little bit. It was mostly social, heading down to the park run, being the 25-minute pacer, etc. Like, I didn't enter any races until I did the Exeter half marathon, and that was I think 2:06 effort off really just very poor training. So there was clearly like some genetic ability there, but I just didn't have, I know now, didn't have the training volume to turn it into anything good. Now, I did get down to an alright 5k PB, 22:31, back in 2019, and that was off pretty minimal running training, still a fair bit of parkour training and weightlifting. And then we moved up here, COVID happened, etc, etc. So I didn't really run at all for a while. So when I rediscovered it, coming out of COVID, and discovered fell running as a sport that exists, I was just sort of expecting that I could translate that ability onto the trails and fells without really having to do anything. I didn't understand about cumulative training load. I just thought I've done it before, so I can do it again, right? Obviously I was in for a very rude awakening because the depth in Sheffield is kind of crazy, very disproportionately weighted towards the intermediate sub-elite area. There's a lot of very good runners around here, and I simply was not emotionally ready to be completely spat out in some of these fell races. I was expecting performances out of myself that I simply had not put in the training to achieve, and it took me a bizarrely long time to understand that. To understand that I can't just be magically good at something, and to understand that fell running has quite a large technical aspect to it, and I was just going to have to practice. Consistency. This ties in pretty closely with patience. Obviously, if you aren't putting in consistent training, if your training blocks are being constantly interrupted by stuff, injury, life stuff, whatever, then you're not going to progress as well as if you can get months and months, years of consistent training under your belt. And that just takes time. The only thing that matters, really, above all else, is cumulative training load. Most of us are going to get probably 95% of the way to our potential simply by finding a training program that suits us and sticking to that training program for a very long time. I was pretty keen to get better, so I was looking for ways to do that. I was trying to do fancy workout shit that the elites do. I at one point tried double threshold training without understanding that I simply didn't have the mileage behind me to even make that work. So I just overcooked myself trying to replicate something that I just didn't have the capability to replicate. It took me far too long to understand that if I just kept my training simple, then I would get much, much further than trying to throw in these hero workouts where I just battered myself and left myself exhausted. Cumulative load is all that matters. A smattering of relatively inconsistent hard workouts is not going to define your training block compared to simply acquiring a consistent training load over time. And then following on from consistency is volume. We've already discussed overall training load, consistent training load, or chronic training load, CTL as it's referred to sometimes. And it took me quite a long time to understand that if I increase my volume, that alone would make me better. Initially, I think I was still trying to find ways to improve off low mileage. I don't really know why. I like running, so it makes sense to just run a lot. But to manage that volume appropriately, in the earlier days when I was training for my first ultramarathon, I tried to whack my volume up way too quickly. That obviously went badly. I would have very erratic weekly volume, so some weeks it would be quite high, other weeks it would be very, very low. So tying back into the consistency, keeping that volume steadily increasing over time, and if you're not increasing it, then just maintaining it over time. If, for example, you only have time to run in the region of 30 kilometers a week, if we're being realistic, it's probably not going to get you that much progress. But if you do it week in, week out, every week, for months, it's going to go a lot better than randomly doing a week of really, really high volume, absolutely wrecking yourself, and then not being able to run very well for a couple of weeks, or doing a week of really high volume, actually injuring yourself, and then being out for 6 weeks to 3 months because of some injury you've given yourself by not managing your volume appropriately. But ultimately, for most runners who want to improve, simply steadily increasing your volume is going to net you way more gains than most other approaches. Obviously, there's not one single way to train. There are ways of getting in low volume training, including some intensity, that will probably serve time-strapped people a lot better. But if you're in a position to run 6 days a week or even 7 days a week, and you just maintain that consistency over time, maybe very slowly increasing the amount of running you're doing over the course of the week, then actually that's going to serve you really, really well. Your body will be conditioned to cope with a lot of things, and because you've increased the load in an appropriate manner and your body's been able to adjust to it, you're going to be at pretty low risk of developing injuries. Not everyone's suited to super high mileage, so this is going to be a bit personal, but finding a sweet spot, an amount of volume that seems to work really well for you, is really the key. So if you're in a position to build it up over time, and you get to a point where if you find you increase your volume by another 5 to 10 kilometers in a week, you start getting injured, and you just bring it back again, and you maintain that sweet spot volume for as long as you can. Comparison. This one messed me up for a long time. I would be directly comparing myself to people who just had more experience than I did. They had more volume in their legs, they had more years of consistent training, and I would be trying to keep up with them. I'd be trying to beat them, and I just couldn't. Didn't have the ability to. And in comparing myself to people who were far more experienced than me and had far more training under their belts than I did, I just really pushed myself into a horrible mental hole and convinced myself that I was really bad at running just because of all that. And I'm not going to pretend that I'm a great runner. I'm still making plenty of mistakes. I'm still learning. But what has happened certainly over the last year is the gap is closing. I run a local trail race series over the spring and summer here called the Trunts. Last year I came first in it because I turned up to every single race, so I had enough points to beat everyone else. And one of the other things that happens in the Trunts is if you get a PB each time, you get extra points, and you get more points the more seconds you break your PB by. So that ranges from 1 point for a very small increase in your PB all the way up to something like I think it's 10 points if you break it by like more than a certain number of seconds. So last year I turned up to every single Trunts race, I placed okay, and I PB'd 4 times, so I had enough points in the league to win. This year it's been a little bit different. Some faster people have decided to show up a bit more regularly, but I also have had a couple that I've either not scored any points in because I was ill and I just jogged it around, or not been able to attend because I was ill and had to rest. But despite that, I've still PB'd 4 times and I'm still going to come second this year. And I keep track of all my Trunts times, so they're all in a graph and I can see my progression over time. And since I started doing the Trunts, been doing it for 3 years now, I've made some pretty enormous progress, and it's a really good route for me to use as a progress marker because it's very fell racy. It's got some pretty gnarly uphills and some technical downhill running. And technical downhill running, if you've been following the channel for a while, you'll know is one of my weaknesses. So to see such consistent improvement over that route means that the training is working. I am getting better, and I should only really be comparing myself to myself, not to the other people around me. Obviously, sometimes I have to take a step back and understand where I am, and I will occasionally now look at other runners and just make a note of how far away I am from them. Could I catch that person in a race? And more often now, when I do occasionally do that, it's now becoming like, oh, give me another year's consistent training, I think I could catch up with that person, rather than looking at those people and just feeling so despondent because their times seemed so far away from mine. So taking a step back, not comparing myself to other people for a while, just running my own training, working out what works for me, has meant that now when I do look at some of those people, I'm much closer to them than I was or ever could have believed I might be 3 years ago. But it's obviously important not to get lost in it. I still need to make sure I'm focusing on what I'm doing and what's working for me, and focus on improving myself, because if I can do that, focus on myself, focus on my process, then the times will get faster, the performances will improve, and then when I next take a step back and have a look at the people ahead of me, I will be closer to them again than I am now. And it's reframing that. Nowadays I feel like I'm excited to compete with those people. I'm excited to see where I am when I pit myself against them, because I've reframed it as a marker of my progress rather than some sort of failure because I haven't yet caught up to them. It's important to occasionally look back and see the distance you have come while acknowledging how much you still have left to go. But the knowledge of how much you still have left to go shouldn't become all-consuming. It's a target, it's a goal, it's a challenge, but it's not the be-all and end-all. Calories. Obviously it's more prevalent in running media now, with more research about carb intake being done and the effect it has on performance, the boost it has on performance. But there has been a lot of literature available for many years discussing how overall calorie intake affects performance. And even if you're not looking to perform really well, it's still important to fuel the exercise you are doing. And to some extent, being lighter is going to help. But there will come a point where if you're trying to operate a calorie deficit and exercising a lot, you're going to feel rubbish and you're not going to be able to put out the effort that you actually want to put out. And I have wrestled with this a bit over the years because I've had ED issues. Thankfully, I've never slid fully into an eating disorder, but I've been on the cusp a few times because I have a number of other issues that can compound in me wanting to enforce control. And obviously, controlling calories is a way of enforcing that if you feel like the rest of your life is lacking control. But obviously trying to do that and run well, it's not going to work. They're not conducive. So it took me a little while to let go and understand that if I fueled my training and I fueled my race efforts, then I would do a lot better. And I feel like that was very obvious over last year and this year with my racing, because I have really zoned in on fueling properly, trying to make sure I'm eating enough. Before my races, I was doing things like 2 hours before a race, I just eat like 2 Belgian buns and then I would run fast, faster than I'd run before. Obviously, just shoving any old calories into your mouth isn't a good long-term solution. So you do have to think about it. Eat a balanced diet with good quality macronutrients and do your best to keep up with your micronutrients. But obviously when you're doing a lot of training, sometimes those simple fast carbs are just going to be necessary if we want to perform our best and if we want to train our best. If you're not fueling your training, then your body's just going to break down and you're not going to be able to get the volume in and you're not going to be able to get the consistency in. And then if you can't get any of those things in, the improvements just aren't going to happen. So I wish I could go back and tell 11-year-old me to be patient, train consistently, increase my volume gradually and sustainably, stop comparing myself to other people while focusing on myself, my own process and my own improvement, and to make sure I'm eating enough to facilitate all of that. However, better late than never. I think now that I've realised all these things, I've still got refinements to make, still changes to the process, things to play around with, optimizations to make, but ultimately I have figured those things out now and I know where I'm headed and the improvements are happening. It's not necessarily a linear progression, there are still failures, but the overall trend is up because I've learned to implement those things. So I'm still rebuilding from the ultramarathon. I made sure to give myself time to ensure my nervous system's recovered and my body's ready to run more. I've got another week of basically easier stuff. I've got a friend visiting from the US this week, so we're going to do some hiking and just kind of have a nice week, but I'll get some running in around things. And then next week I begin preparing myself for the autumn and winter training block. I think with all these lessons behind me and having a much better understanding of what works for me, I'm really excited to get into the next training block. I would start it now, but obviously with my friend visiting this week and still kind of letting my body rebuild and readjust post ultramarathon, I am making myself be patient but I'm excited. I'm really excited to get into this training block and I'm really excited to share it. So thank you very much for watching and I will catch you in the next one.